Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to join you. As was indicated in the last session, MOOCs are a topic of major conversation in the United States. There have been over 100 newspaper articles in just the last few months on MOOCs. The New York Times has anointed MOOCs as higher education of the future, at least some of its opinion writers have. We at QAA, the Council for Higher Education Accreditation, talk about MOOCs. I've written about MOOCs. I've never followed MOOCs. All right, this is a first. I also was dying to utter some contradictions during the last session, or just say why a few times, but I restrained myself. About quality assurance, a benefit, a burden, perhaps some of both. To take on this topic, I need to say a few things about the United States and accreditation, about my organization, QAA, and then talk about benefit and burden and accreditation, and looking at our stakeholders, what they want, what the benefits are, what the burden is that I believe at least we carry, and what to do with regard to that. The US and the UK, when it comes to quality review, are quite different in a number of ways, but we do share some things. We play, our organizations, the QAA and QAA, pivotal roles in advancing and protecting quality. We have a complex, a nuanced, and not well understood enterprise to protect and advance and defend. We have our supporters and advocates, but we also have a number of critics. We are constantly engaged in an effort to preserve the best in higher education as we know it, yet we must be focused on the future, as the last conversation indicates. And almost to a person anywhere, there's a strong commitment to the value and the worth of what we do. When I talk about accreditation in the US, I'm talking about quality assurance and quality improvement, threshold quality and quality enhancement. I find all too often we're divided by the same word, so I want to make that clear. And just offer you 6 quick points about US accreditation, most critical of which are accreditation was invented by higher education. It is a non-governmental enterprise. We do not have publicly funded accreditation in the sense that higher education does it in the United States. We consider ourselves the gateway to academic quality. We focus on universities, colleges, and programs. Each of these entities undergoes periodic review. The defining features of that review are self-regulation, self-determination with regard to what counts as quality and how quality is judged, and peer review. We are built on and advocate for, just by our very existence, the values of institutional autonomy, of academic freedom, and a mission-driven, a fitness for purpose approach to higher education. The accreditation community in the United States is a highly decentralized enterprise. There are 85 different institutional and programmatic accrediting organizations operating right now in the US, all non-governmental, all nonprofit organizations. What is not part of accreditation, and I say all this with a bit of trepidation because I always ask myself, is it not part of US accreditation or not yet part of US accreditation? We don't have direct control by government. We don't have national or federal, that is government standards. We don't have a national or federal qualifications framework, and we do not have federal comparisons, but of course we are the home of US News and World Report, talking about ideas that people might want to question from the United States and relating that to our conversation about MOOCs. I say that I worry when I offer this up because we have been buried in an avalanche of government regulation over the last 4 to 6 years, and that is fundamentally changing the character of US accreditation and strengthening the hand of government in the accreditation activity. QAA, my organization, is like the accrediting organizations in that we too were created by colleges and universities. We are funded by them. We are managed by them. I answer to a governing board of primarily college and university chief executive officers, along with some institutional members and public membership. Our purpose is to provide national coordination of accreditation. We represent the Academy in doing that. We provide that coordination for the 85 different accrediting organizations. We are, yet again, an example of self-regulation and peer review, and indeed that is what we practice. We exist at an intersection that's very crowded and very tension-filled. The intersection of universities, accrediting organizations, and government. That is, we work with government even though we are not part of government. We do all this through 4 major functions. We represent the interests of our members. We have 3,000 of them, degree-granting colleges and universities, to the federal government, what we call government affairs. We do that because although the US government does not directly control accreditation, accreditation is in federal law and regulation. We also review accrediting organizations for quality. We accredit the accreditors, if you will, and of the 85, 60 are recognized by QAA. The federal government recognizes as well. We're the private sector analog. We provide membership services, and most recently, we have formalized our international quality activity. The QAA recognition process, just to mention this, you can go to our website at QAA.org and take a look at what we do, involves 6 standards and a periodic review of institutional and programmatic accreditors. Just a quick, brief description of each of those 6 standards. There are subparts, it's not 6 only. They're aspirational, about advancing academic quality, about accountability. We're concerned with the proper functioning of accrediting organizations. We want to know that they're effective and that their performance reaches a certain level of integrity and rigor and usefulness to the public. The reason I had to fly out late yesterday and got here this morning is we have a committee that reviews the different accrediting organizations for recognition, and that committee met yesterday, and it was essential that I was there. That by way of background. What about the benefit burden issue? Well, to discuss that, I think it's important to look at our stakeholders, and I've identified 5 here: colleges and universities, the academic community, and then the public and private sectors, government, foundations, corporations, students, of course, the general public, and the international community. They all have a vital interest in accreditation in the United States. And I've thought about this for many years. What do stakeholders want? And I've right now answered that in the climate in which we operate with 4 points. Our stakeholders want accreditation aligned with reliable and high quality education. They don't want us accrediting substandard colleges and universities or programs. They want immediate and dependable information. They want it about performance, and they want it available to everyone and anyone. They want transparency, in short. And they want, if there are problems, to have quick identification and action when there is clear evidence that an institution is performing at a substandard level. And they don't want degree mills. They don't want degree mills out there that are so harmful to students and society. That's what stakeholders want from accreditation. We've tested this with focus groups, with surveys. It's pretty straightforward, but I believe important to keep in mind. Those 4 things that stakeholders want, keep in mind, if you would, for a second. Is that how we describe our benefits? No. This is what we tend to say about accreditation, and not just QAA, but accreditors and supporters of accreditation. We're the basic indicator of academic legitimacy in the United States. We assure threshold quality. We provide and play a very important role in providing access to both public and private money from the government for student aid and research, money from corporations for research, money for various programs from foundations and other private sector entities. We don't have the money, but we are the gatekeeper. We are the gate through which colleges and universities must go in order to get the money. We describe our benefits as easing transfer of credit and student mobility. We think we build public confidence and trust, and we think we are helpful in working with the international higher education community. If you want to know whether a college or university is doing a good job, a great job, or is substandard. We tell people you could rely on accreditation. We've proved ourselves. We've been around for over 100 years. We think there's a relationship. I'm not arguing a causal relationship between accredited status and student success. We think we've demonstrated that peer review is the best way to judge academic quality, academics reviewing academics. And we say, look, we have a strong system of higher education here in the United States. I don't like the best in the world talk, but we have a strong system, partly because we're big and we've had a lot of money to put into higher education. But we've done a very, very strong job, both with access and with quality and accreditation. Peer review has been, without question, part of that. We tell the stakeholders that if accreditation went away tomorrow, you'd invent something like it fairly soon. And we urge on them the important role we play in all those factors that I mentioned earlier: transfer of credit, access to money, protecting students, and protecting society. All of those benefits we describe boil down to we play key roles in the society. I think that's very impressive. I think that is accurate. However, are these the roles that our stakeholders want us to play? Are we meeting their needs? And that takes us to the issue of burden with regard to accreditation. Given the benefits, what about the burden? We have a number of critics out there, and they'll say, look, talk all you want. That's great. You're not doing the right benefits. This isn't what the public is so concerned about. Other critics will say, well, your benefits are okay, but you're not doing a very good job. We agree that that's what you should be doing, but why don't you do it better? And others will say, look, you're providing benefits, but so what? Again, this is not what the stakeholders value most about what you do. Benefits defined as a role in society, in short, are different from the four things that the stakeholders want. And it wasn't very hard to find examples of what I'm talking about with regard to burden. Accreditation described as small, feeble regime of quality control. Accreditors often foster institutional conformity. Accreditation is frequently accused of being a barrier to innovation. This is fairly devastating. Every bad thing you read happened in an accredited institution. We've just had 2 years of national dialogue that has been extremely difficult about for-profit higher education, with Senate hearings, a lot of government dialogue, a lot of newspaper discussion, and all the institutions that were called to task in the course of that 2-year period were accredited institutions. Recent paper came out this fall, talks about the disconnect between the view that we have a really great set of universities in the United States and all the data that are out there, all the surveys that our graduates are not doing so terribly well in a number of areas. Their skills are not what they ought to be, and the 69% of graduates who can't compare editorial points of view is an instance of that. A recent survey of a few months ago, we're really convinced in the United States about the importance of degrees and certificates. But in that same survey, 46% of the respondents said the quality of higher education is the same or worse in the United States than elsewhere, and 58% said the quality was worse than it has been in the past. Not encouraging either about higher education or accreditation. And then we had something really, for us, politically remarkable happen in the United States in February. The President of the United States talked about accreditation. Now, and this was in the President's State of the Union. President gets up every year at the beginning of the year and addresses a joint session of Congress about the state of the country. And in the course of that speech, the president talked about the importance of higher education, its value, how it had to be affordable, and tuition increases in higher education are growing at a rate even greater than health care in the United States. The increases are phenomenal. There is enormous concern about that. Student loan indebtedness exceeds credit card indebtedness in the United States. We're talking about $1 trillion that is owed by people who have graduated from college. And the president's worried about this, and the White House is worried about it, and Congress is worried about it. We're all worried about it. And they're worried not only about affordability, they're worried about student achievement. They're worried about outcomes. And in the document that accompanied the president's State of the Union address, there is this language. And what jumped out at the higher ed community and at the quality assurance community, the accreditation community, those words, a new alternative system of accreditation. We have had, if you will, the burden of enormous criticism over the last several years. That's been part of the rationale for all the regulation I said that we have undergone. But it's always been criticism such that you got to fix the existing system. You got to fix those accrediting bodies that are out there now. They got to do a better job. It has not been forget about the current system of accreditation. Maybe we need another one. And maybe we need an accreditation system that is run by the government and not by higher education itself. So this was seismic in its impact last month, and people are still talking about it. But when I talk about the burden, when I talk about the likelihood of stakeholders on the one hand, what they want, and what we say is so good about accreditation, like almost like ships passing in the night, this is the result of that circumstance. What do we need to do? We need to enhance the view of the benefits, and we need to diminish the perception of burden. And that takes us. That doesn't take sitting back and waiting for the public or students or influential political parties to suddenly see the light about the value and worth and purpose of accreditation. It's what we have to do to legitimately convince. Yesterday at our Committee on Recognition meeting, I mentioned that earlier, we're reviewing accrediting organizations, and when the accrediting organizations want SHIA recognition, they have to come before us. They have to meet with us, with the committee. They've submitted an application, a self-review, and the committee's made up of accreditors and institutional people and members of the public, and they have a lot of questions often about the application that we received. And one of the accreditors sitting before us was one of the largest of the regional accreditors, and generally if folks outside the US are familiar with US accreditation, they're familiar with ABET, one of the business accreditors, or the regional accreditors. And I won't say which one. We were having this interesting dialogue about accreditation, where things stood. By the way, did the accreditor meet the SHIA standards? And in the course of that discussion, the chair of the accrediting commission of this major regional accrediting organization said this. She said, the biggest challenge for all of us is to create awareness of the value of accreditation. That is how immediate this concern is for us here in the United States. So what do? Some thoughts. We don't talk enough about the value and purpose of what we do, that we're the gateway to academic quality. Why don't we assume it, we live it. We, in higher education, have a deep belief in the worth of what we do. We care. Caring people go into this business. We need to convey more and not only assume. We need to convince the stakeholders that, yes, we are working and do meet those needs of yours in many ways, but also see the centrality of the role we play in society. I mean, students will take for granted that going to an accredited institution means a greater likelihood of transfer of credit. We work at that. It's important. It should be seen as something that adds value to a student's opportunity and education. We need to, yes, protect the best of what we have, but we need to listen more, and we need a greater public commitment to change. MOOCs is one discussion, and a number of the points that Stephen made earlier, we are looking at ourselves at QIA and with the accrediting organizations, because yes, we can see this streaming into an institutional setting, even though it's extra institutional right now. And the MOOC issue has raised questions not only about online, which is pretty well established throughout many of our institutions, but it's drawn attention again, because we've been through this before in the US, to competency-based education, to assessment of prior learning, to adult learning. And out there for us on the periphery, we've not ever brought them together, and the accrediting community does not want to. What about rankings and the role they play? Because higher ed may eschew the rankings, but they play a significant role in the judgment of corporations. They play a significant role in the judgment of foundations. They play a significant role for students. And that's an area where we need to get together in some way. I'm not sure the way. Qualifications frameworks. How do we work with countries all over the world with qualifications frameworks? We don't have one. What's going to happen to that in the future? So the capacity, the commitment to change, and being very vocal about that and the importance of it is another part, in my view, of the how to diminish the burden. And then we need to say, over and over again, with appropriate modesty, if you will, we do contribute to the strength of higher education, and there are very few people these days who would question the significance of a strong higher education system to our country, to students, and to the world. We can publicly reinforce our benefits. We can make the case against the burden. I think part of this is tied up with a phrase I've not used deliberately, but I will use now: public accountability. In US and accreditation in higher education, we ducked the accountability issue for years. I'm going back to the 80s. And we let an accountability set of expectations grow all around us, oftentimes led by states or led by the federal government. And now we're on the receiving end. We're reacting, and we don't like all of it. The emphasis on compliance and regulation is driving out energy and opportunity for quality improvement. Accreditation, at its heart, is about making things better. It's not judging a college or university to throw it out or close it. It's about taking what's okay and making it even better, or taking what needs to be better and working with that institution to become better. We need to be tougher with regard to public accountability about poor performance, and publicly so. One of the great virtues of accreditation in the US is that when problems are found in a college or university, we give people lots of time to fix that problem. Well, this is heretical. What if we give them too much time? What if we don't move more expeditiously so that students aren't harmed? Can we find a way to do that, yet still address quality improvement? Rigor, the strength of what we do, and we've already heard this today, is important as well. It's not enough for accreditation to be aligned with the okay. We need to be aligned with high quality, and we need to work harder, even harder than we do with regard to that. There are, and I didn't realize this until this round of recognition reviews, recognition of accrediting organizations that we do, there are accreditors that will accredit, maybe it's provisionally, institutions or programs that don't meet all the standards of the accreditor. I ask them every time this comes, why? Why aren't you having your institutions meet all of your standards? We require you to meet all of our standards. These 5 accreditors over here require the same thing. We would enhance rigor. We would make a better case for advocacy and protection of quality in higher education if we were to do that. Another example with regard to both public accountability and rigor, and how do we protect quality in innovation. And an excellent example of that was the MOOC conversation we just had, and the questions we need to be asking ourselves as we move forward. Some of the things then we might do. So a few things about U.S. accreditation and QIA, thoughts about the benefits, thoughts about the burden for accreditation, but most important, we need to keep reminding ourselves of our value and our purpose. We need to reaffirm those benefits, work with stakeholders. We need to make the case against what has turned out to be a considerable burden for us. Thank you.
We share challenges in terms of articulating the benefits of quality assurance in a convincing manner, and also reducing perceived or real burdens. As the room is actually full of stakeholders, different stakeholders in higher education, who are potentially both the beneficiaries of quality assurance and the burden bearers or burden makers, I look forward, and I'm sure that Judith is looking forward to your questions and comments to her, and also perhaps answering the how. Judith's given us her answers, but perhaps we can have some from the floor. If you could just wait until the microphone reaches you, even if you've got a voice like a foghorn like myself, we need it for the recording. So please, the floor is yours.
Martin Williams, I spoke earlier. As an official of a government, when I read what you put up there as the message from the President, I see a government that is trying to limit its financial liabilities and is asking you to help it. Because I've written that sort of thing myself during my career. Not of course to the QAA, but
I didn't know you were a speechwriter for Mr. Obama.
And you know how these things tend to get expressed. And that says to me, fewer people. If I was simplifying, I would say that implies too many people are going through without getting the right standards. Simultaneously, you describe yourself being under pressure to have more innovation, more imagination, more flexibility, which says to me quite a lot of programs and people who people think ought to be getting through aren't. First of all, is that tension right? I mean, have I interpreted that correctly? And I'm just interested in, do you feel you can help or should be helping the federal government to balance its budgets if that is what it is asking you to do?
I can say yes to all of that, but I want to say more. Yes, what's happening in the United States right now is that the public policy position we took in the 1960s about access and equity, which are the foundations of federal funding for higher education, that public policy in the last decade has shifted. Now, part of it was a recession, all right, but part of it was not. It shifted from access and equity to access, equity, and completion. And yes, money is driving that. And I think the federal government, and I said this in front of my colleagues in the US, the federal government is in essence saying to us, you've got to find some way to improve your financial position. And what you've done so far hasn't made much difference. And the only way we're going to make a real difference is to fundamentally change the business model. And the community, by and large, does not want to do that. Yes, if fewer people went to college, there'd be less spending on Pell Grants and loans. All right, Pell Grants are the major federal grant program. I think that's a factor, but not the dominant factor. The dominant factor is spend the money well. If every one of the students in the Pell Grant program graduated, which could not begin to happen, all right, we're talking about, I think, 9 million students, all right, and a number of them will, but the graduation rate is less than 50% for 4 years. If that would satisfy, I think, the federal government. Let me put it to you this way. The chair of the House Education Committee, which has a lot of say in these matters in the House of Representatives, started a hearing a couple years ago saying, we are putting more money into higher education we have ever put in, and that is true. The Obama administration has been phenomenally generous to higher education. We have a say in what's going to happen to it. All right, so it's completion, it's a greater voice. What's happened, though, Martin, is the federal government is now moved into the academic judgment arena and what counts as academic quality. So what you quite correctly heard in my comments is we don't like that. The accreditors don't like that, the higher ed community doesn't like it. But we're going to have to do more to not have that happen. And I didn't address innovation, but I want people, I can talk to you about that after.
Thanks, Judith. Oli, is there a microphone here?
Hi, Oli McKenzie, University and University Ventures. You referred to the debacle which has gone to Senate and elsewhere over for-profit provision and,
yes.
and reference to that these were people that had, institutions that had been accredited. Have you got any, amongst friends, have you got any reflections on that?
Yeah, I do, and I did not like the hearing. I think that the for-profit sector contributes to higher education. I think it has a place. I don't think it's going away, and I think it does help some students. So that's where I am. I have a lot of colleagues, knee-jerk reaction, if it's for-profit, it's no good. Not everybody, but that's still a powerful sentiment in the higher education community. That said, every time Senator Harkin held one of his hearings, I wanted to hit somebody because I thought they were unfair in a number of ways. That said, it forced some cleaning up of the act, all right? That is, there were some bad actors, some things needed to be done, both by accreditors and by the federal government, and some of those things have been done. There are bad actors, some everywhere. All right, it's not sector-specific, for-profit, nonprofit. All right, so I do think that it produced some gain. I really don't like how it was done. If I were a venture capitalist with a major investment in a for-profit, or I probably am a shareholder, whether I know it or not, in a for-profit, and I lost a lot of money because enrollments went down considerably, investor share, return diminished. Kaplan Incorporated supports the Washington Post. Washington Post newspaper, it's in a lot of trouble because Kaplan's profits went way, way down. So I wouldn't be happy then. But I think for the sake of students and higher education, and sometimes students are complicit in this, but mostly I believe they're not. And I think student indebtedness is horrifying, the level of it. I think a country, and we have done this for years, that builds public policy for higher education on personal student debt. I mean, I think that's a terrible way to operate, but that's what we do. I think we helped put a dent in some of those things, all right? But, so that's my answer to your question.
Jack Grove from the Higher Education, from Times Higher Education. What would you like to see done about accreditation mills? Because it seems like the system in the US is very, very easy to manipulate for those people who just want to set up and operate in the same way as degree mills, but just set themselves up as a regulator.
Yeah. I mean, any of us could form an accrediting organization tomorrow. It's becoming the nonprofit status, so 501. C3, you get licensed by a state. I mean, like any other business. It's a business. It's not a higher ed provider. What we are doing now is we worked hard with some members of the House of Representatives and got a federal definition for a degree mill. We're trying to get a federal definition for accreditation mill. So we've got a basis for finding them and calling them out. Second, we are a front line vis-a-vis accreditation mills because of our recognition function. And they're likely to come to us before they go to the federal government, and this is not public information, but we've stopped several accreditation mills. if we had a definition, we could identify them, and if we could identify them, we could help get them out of business. All right, but we don't have that definition, and dealing with it online is very hard. But short of getting a definition, doing what we can to push the whitelist of, we draw a line around recognized accreditors. The 85 are all recognized, either by us or by the federal government or both of us. All right, that all helps some. We require that the accreditors call to the attention of their stakeholders. That accreditation mills and degree mills are a problem. Here's some information for you. That isn't enough. I don't know how many accreditation mills there are out there worldwide. I've seen estimates in the hundreds. Maybe Carolyn knows better than I. She probably does. She knows better than I about everything internationally. So, all right. That's the best answer I can give you. You can fight them more. You can run articles. I'm serious. If the press, really, really push this and accreditation mills and what to be aware of, what to stay away from, realize when you're getting duped. Yeah. But it isn't a lot of places, and they're online. Yeah. And those same students you were talking about in India, they're not going to wind up with a Stanford MOOC. They could wind up with a degree mill that claims it's accredited by an accreditation mill.
We have time for one more question, and it's from Anthony.
Anthony McLaren, QAA. Judith, thank you very much for that presentation. You made a very clear and powerful case, not only about the pressures that are coming to bear upon accreditation, the processes of quality assurance, but also the challenge that quality assurance agencies themselves need to respond. We can't wait and hope that it's going to be somebody else's problem or solution that is going to be found to this balance between assurance and burden. And I just wondered, in the context of the accrediting bodies that your organization works with, perhaps you could just give us some indications of where you begin to see evidence and the kinds of changes that are coming about in response to the pressures that you've described.
Okay, a couple quick examples. One, we have two standards in our recognition review for which we do not get any love and affection. One is that we require the accreditors to require their institutions to provide evidence to the public of student achievement, defined by the institution, but we want it out there for the public, and we require the same of programs. That gets us to public accountability. Similarly, we said to accreditors, you want to be recognized by us, you not only have to make public accredited status, you got to give reasons for it. All right, and it's not just they met all our standards. And we're trying to get at those situations where you're accredited, but not all standards have met. There's some deficiencies, and we're trying to get at there are problems. Be alert if you're going to this school. You may find their distance learning program isn't viewed as adequate in the eyes of its accreditors. The federal government has really jumped in here, trying to force the issue of what we call bright lines. That's not going very far, and there's a lot of pushback on that. But when I did the quote from the chair of that accrediting commission, for her to say that with the passion that she did, the message is there, I think, in a way it never has been. We finessed accountability in the 80s in the US. We called it assessment. We were never very clear about assessment for what. We got tons of assessment. All right, all over the place. We are at the end of finesse. I mean, there's no more road for the can to be kicked. So we just have to address it. If you look at a number of the national associations, Voluntary Framework of Accountability, the College Portrait Essential Outcomes, there are all kinds of projects out there that help schools with tools to learn and provide evidence of student achievement, how to go about that. And the accreditors have been picking up all of this. So it's all happening, but there's not yet, in my view, the passion around the importance of doing it for the benefit of the academy. And that's where we need to push even more.
Well, Judith, as ever, passionate about accreditation and quality. Energetic, even though you arrived at 6:30 this morning, and thought-provoking. So I'd like to invite everybody to thank you in the traditional way.
Thank you, Stephen.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to the final debate of the day. To introduce your panel, Rachel Wenstone is Vice President Higher Education at the National Union of Students, formerly member of the National Union of Students Executive Committee and Communications and Internal Affairs Officer at Leeds University Union. On behalf of NUS, Rachel is a member of the boards of both QAA and the OIA. On the future direction of student engagement, Rachel says students should be given the space to create the solutions in partnership with students, institutions, not just raise the problems. Camille Candico is Research Fellow at the King's Learning Institute at King's College London. Camille's research focus is on international and comparative higher education, with an interest in the curriculum and student experience. Camille's leading on a QAA commissioned research project exploring students' perceptions of quality. Camille says the focus of student engagement in the future should be about active partnership as well, but we must be aware of the challenges of engaging an increasingly diverse range of students. Gwen van der Velden is Director of Learning and Teaching Enhancement at the University of Bath. After a number of years working in academic development, Gwen now heads up quality assurance and enhancement, the implementation of the teaching and learning plan, and student engagement, amongst other things. Gwen was a member of the Quality Code Advisory Group that developed the chapter on student engagement. She's also leading a QAA commissioned research project looking at current practices around student engagement. Gwen will argue that the future of student engagement lies in a more sophisticated understanding of student engagement, and in particular, a better understanding of what a valid student voice is. And finally, Emilia Todorova is final year undergraduate student at Glasgow Caledonian University. As a trainer for Sparks, the Scottish agency dedicated to supporting student engagement in quality, a student reviewer for QAA Scotland and for numerous European bodies, and an expert for the European Students' Union, Emilia's experience is broad and impressive for someone who's still to graduate. Emilia's take on the future of student engagement challenges whether students are actually willing to take full advantage of the opportunities offered to them at their institutions. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for the panel this afternoon. And my name's Dan Derricker. I'm the independent student member of QAA's board. I chair the Student Advisory Board along with Rachel. And in my day job, when I actually do it, I'm Student Engagement Officer at the University of Lincoln. This afternoon, we are debating student engagement, future directions, and maximising impact. Each of the four panellists will introduce their thoughts on the topic, and we'll be taking as many questions from the floor as possible, and also from Twitter. So please do be tweeting them with the hashtag QAA 2013. And in the spirit of quality, if you're looking for some external reference points, we're going for a mix of Question Time and Jeremy Kyle. I can't promise there's any DNA results later, but we'll certainly give it a go. First up, outlining their views this afternoon, Rachel Wenstone of NUS.
Thank you. Just before I start, I want to say that I think often in the UK we use student engagement to mean two different things, and that's student engagement with individual students in their learning and teaching on individual projects, and that's very important. But I think when I'm talking about student engagement here today, and I think actually what I gather the rest of the panel are talking specifically around student voice, and it's something that's been mentioned a lot, but I hope that what I say will cover that. I was asked to talk about student engagement in an ideal world, and I suppose how you frame your ideal world depends on how you critique the current setup. But before I go there, I do want to start by saying that we have an awful lot to be proud of currently. It's well within living memory that quality was something owned by experts, in inverted commas, institutional staff, and the idea that students would have any kind of say in assuring the quality of their educational experience would have made many vice chancellors fall off their chairs. And the QAA was engaging with students well before it was fashionable to do so, and I think for that we have an awful lot to be grateful for and to thank them for. But bearing this in mind, I suppose my critique of the current arrangement, which is quite similar to my wider analysis of student engagement, is that the underpinning assumption of student engagement is usually that we ought to be engaging students as players in already existing processes, rather than working in partnership with students to ensure those processes and importantly the priorities that emerge from them are relevant and meaningful to students and enable students to become powerful actors in enhancing quality. Students are part of creating, as I said, creating the processes and the solutions rather than just coming up with the things that they don't like. In a way, student engagement can be quite conservative because it leaves untouched the structures that we believe deliver quality, and by engaging students in those structures discourages them from taking on a wider critique of the quality framework. And in many respects actually can therefore reinforce a dominant culture which sees certain types of students almost outcast from the quality process and the enhancement process because they don't fit what the current structure provides for. Now, as it happens, I think we have a very well-balanced system, and I admire the efforts of the QAA to work in partnership with the sector as a whole to carry out a statutory duty to ensure the public quality of HE provision. And I'm not talking about changing the basic principles that underpin this system of quality. But in my ideal world, I think that institutions, and importantly here, because we're talking about student voice, independent student unions would work together to innovate around quality processes, embedding quality in a wider partnership approach that seeks to support individuals and groups of students to work with staff on their specific subject or disciplinary context, or wider than that, to critique and interpret quality on how we measure it, seeking to go beyond compliance with available codes and guidance and towards a real and consistent enhancement approach. The basis of quality and change would centre around relationships and not about process. And by embedding quality in academic practice, you make quality almost part of the curriculum, and I think create a rationale for quality that makes it really meaningful to a wider group of students that we can't currently necessarily engage with. It offers students the chance to create solutions in the same way that they're asked to do in the rest of their education. And that was the bit actually I prepared today, and I did want to add something actually to the end of it when we're talking about our ideal world of student engagement. So just leaving aside what I've said, I think one of the difficulties that we're facing currently, or one of the things that sort of happened over the last couple of years, is part of the diversification of the sector, is universities looking to outsource their learning and teaching or their frontline student services. And what I would say is I don't believe it's possible to have student engagement in a partnership model in any meaningful way where those services are outsourced, because the objectives of an institution of the Students' Union are the same. It's about knowledge creation, it's about what education is for and what education is about, and helping people to become the best that they can. Where education is outsourced, often the basis of that is profit. And I don't believe that the objectives of the students engaging in those services would be to help that company make profit. And so... so where you have what's happening, for example, in Sussex, and it's something that NUS has been has been supporting those students with, it's very difficult, therefore, to have student engagement in that. So I will leave that as a caveat.
Thank you. Hi, as Sarah said, I'm Camille Cantico, and in addition to the comments Rachel's made about student engagement being very much about student voice and representation, I come from the US perspective, where it's very much also about notions about what students do, how they spend their time, and how institutional resources are allocated to support students. And having recently become engaged, I've become very aware about what engagement is not, and it's no time to be passive, submissive, or complacent. It's very much an active process, so that's what I want to highlight in three thoughts today. One is about my vision for student engagement in the UK, which I see very much as a partnership. And that partnership is between academic staff, students, and the management and administration of an institution. And I see in large part that being driven by some trends that are developing that I see growing about measuring student engagement in the UK. There's going to be a review of the NSS coming up in 2015, and I think we're going to see much more of an engagement focus. University not being about a time of just measuring whether students are satisfied with their experience, but how are institutions and students engaging in that. And I also see this happening with a lot of data collection at both the local level, the national level, and an increasing use of things like big data in quality. What do those metrics have to use? One big discussion that's been happening is what's the role of the NSS in quality assurance? The official numbers, how does that fit in? How could that fit in? And looking forward to the future, how could those government policies be aligned to benefit students and quality assurance? And I also see measurements happening with staff engagement. Staff have been very upset, and there's a lot of grumpiness in UK higher education from the staff perspective. And I think what we get is a lot of desire, fine, you keep asking students about their opinions, but what about us? We're part of this relationship as well. And where are we going? This is where I see a lot of thinking of the very traditional notion of engagement, vows and formalities. And from students, that's a sense of how are students engaging before they come to university, during their time at university, and also after their time at university. I think alumni are an untapped resource within UK higher education, not just as a donation stream, but also collaborating with institutions. But I also think this notion of students' commitment can't just always be asking more time of students who are very busy. And there's notions of time commitments on students and making sure that their engagement activities with the institution don't take away from their degree studies. And also if students are being formally involved in different aspects of running the institutions, how are they paid? Are they offered internships that can be formalized so that the roles are made sense of? And making sure that students are being treated the way they should if they're becoming very formally part of institutions. And from the institutional side, I see increasing use of things like charters, contracts, code of practice, codes of conduct. What are institutions offering students and how are they being held accountable for that? And looking forward, the long haul, I see an increasing need to look at the diversity of students, the diversity of student voice, and the diversity of student experiences. Not just on campus versus online, but very different kinds of students who are often left out of the picture when we talk about higher education today. And I also think there's a need to look at the global student experience, particularly the role of international students, not just as a funding stream, but very much the student experience. To plug a book coming out later this month, The Global Student Experience, which I've edited, puts out a reason as to why we need to start looking at internationalization from the student's perspective, and what do students get out of their time being international students, and also what does it look like around the world. So a lot of its perspectives on these issues. The UK is one perspective, as is the US, but there are many different perspectives on these around the world on what the student experience is and what it consists of. So happy to take questions in a little bit. On to you, Gwen.
Thank you. First and foremost, congratulations on your engagement. I think the announcing that just right now is absolutely fantastic. And on the book. What a commitment. Okay. A few things in terms of where I hope to be 5 or 10 years from now, looking back at what we do now. I'm researching in student engagement. I lead on student engagement in my own institution together with the Student Union, and I work with a number of other universities on student engagement, how that relates to National Student Survey, to quality assurance, etc. One of the things that I keep coming up against, that I hope 5 to 10 years from now we've resolved, is how we understand the students that we have. Not the traditional student, because actually I have great trouble finding that traditional student and pointing them out. I'm very aware that the systems that we use at my university, at the University of Bath, are very successful because they fit our student population. But the minute I talk to another institution where there's a large amount of distance learning, we struggle. We don't know how to engage those students. But actually we do. We engage them on learning, we engage them on staying the course, we engage them on making it till the end and getting a good grade and making the transition into work. So we get that part of it right, but how do we deal with those students in terms of governance? And that's where a lot of sophistication needs to come in. On distance learning students, on international students, on mature part-time students. These are not traditional students, but they are a very large part. They are, in fact, if you tot it all up, the larger part of the higher education system, not sector. I did listen today. Hopefully, over the next 5 to 10 years, we become a lot more sophisticated about what we do there. I thought it was particularly interesting today to hear the discussion about MOOCs. Because alongside MOOCs, whether it flies in the version that it works now, whether it looks completely different 5 to 10 years from now, whether it's had a major impact or less of an impact or looks different than we think now, there's one thing happening in the background there that is incredibly useful, and that's the development of learning analytics. At that point, we are looking at how students behave online. That information is information we've never had at the scale we're going to develop it in the next few years. And the US is already looking at it. Different values in higher education systems, so we will look at it in a slightly different way, but alongside each other, that's going to tell us an awful lot about what students are interested in, when they're interested, when they study, when they learn, how they do it, how often they return to the same content, what approaches they take, what type of questions they ask, how influential tutor responses really are. It gives us actual data. And I think that in terms of student engagement in governance, the way we do it in traditional universities, whatever that is, when it comes to the wider forms of higher education, those are the things we need to look at. Maybe the student voice doesn't come through by having an academic representative on a committee, but maybe it comes through by a really solid understanding of the data, of the student's behavior, of student choices. Maybe the voice comes through evidence and research rather than representation. Maybe we just need to become far more sophisticated about how we think about these things. And when I speak to institutions where there's a large postgraduate provision, student engagement in governance looks very, very different. And again, there are different approaches there. So hopefully 5 to 10 years from now, Camille's written her second book, and this time on the governance side of student engagement. I don't sit down long enough to write books, sorry. Specifically in terms of quality, I'm very interested in seeing what comes out of the work from Graham Gibbs and a number of people around him who are doing very interesting work. They are looking at what Graham Gibbs at the moment is calling academic democracy. There has been a sea change, and this is the bit that cheers me up no end. There's been a sea change in what we do in terms of talking about learning, teaching, and quality in the sector. You remember, if you've been in the sector for a while, you remember the teaching quality enhancement funding, the development of learning and teaching strategies, the fund for the development of teaching and learning, teaching learning technology program. I'm going to stop there because I don't really want to tell you how old I am. I feel very old at this moment. That concentrated on the teaching side of things, on the quality of learning perhaps, but very much on the teaching side of things. What are the teaching staff doing? How do we set up a curriculum? What are the materials we provide? And the student in all of that was silent. What we see now is that we're very much looking for political reasons, for economical reasons, for whatever reasons. What we're looking at now is what's happening on the student side of things. And this, to me, as an educationalist, is interesting. For quite a while as a sector, we've developed the teaching and thought about that hard. We're now looking at the other side of the lecture theatre or the online learning environment or however you do it. And we're looking at the learning side of things. Now, I'm really hoping that over the next few years, we put those together. So the discussions that are happening now in a number of large projects about flipped classrooms or thinking about new forms of distance learning or taking a completely different approach to how we put the curriculum together, where the learning side of things and the teaching side of things comes together, maybe that's where the real quality is. Maybe that is where the academic standards, the teaching side of things, and the quality, the learning side of things comes back together. And if that happens, then 5 to 10 years from now, student engagement has brought us a lot more than we might have thought of so far.
Good afternoon, everyone. When I was asked to think about student engagement and how it affects quality assurance and what is my ideal perspective, my first thought was, what exactly is student engagement? There are so many definitions out there, and as Rachel and the rest pointed out, it could be the student voice or it could be the student participation. But I decided to take a look at the quality culture. Quality culture could be found on any level in academia, from the highest management to the teaching staff to the students. And the students are a very big and essential part of that. So I started asking myself, do students really take advantage of the quality mechanisms that their institutions are offering them? Our institutions here in the UK offer many ways for students to feed back to them. There are the student questionnaires, feedback questionnaires on modules, on teaching. There are focus groups, there are academic committees. However, I don't think that the students actually take advantage of them. I haven't been in any institutions, and I visited a few, that actually hasn't struggled to get student participation. And it is very difficult for them, and they keep wondering, why can't we engage with students? So I'm actually redirecting this question to the students. Why are you not engaging with your institutions? You have all these wonderful mechanisms to engage with it. So you need to start to become active in that point. Students need to realize that for their education to become better, they actually need to start participating in partnership with their institutions, because the rules are there, they're opened. Now, in the past few months, I visited several institutions around Europe, and it's evident to me that this is not only a problem within the UK, it's a problem everywhere. And I only saw 2 examples of where actually these quality mechanisms worked, and there was a good quality culture. One of these institutions were a military one, where they only had 1,200 students, and all of them participated in feedback questionnaires. All of them gave their input, and they were invited to committees. But again, it was a military institution, it's very different context than what we have here. The other one was another private institution, which was also very small, and this leads me to believe that small institutions actually can engage very much more easier with their students than bigger ones, of course. So we need to look into what they're doing effectively, and the common denominator in that for me was that both institutions had these processes as more mandatory ones. So they asked all their students to complete their feedback forms at the same time, at the same place, as in all of their labs. And actually they had a 100% response rate. And it wasn't a response rate of yes, I like this, or no, I don't like this. It was actually a good quality response saying what they like and what they want to improve. In my ideal world, I want to see students become more active and realize their power. And I want to see them working in partnership with their lecturers to help them enhance their teaching and guidance towards them, to shape their assessment strategies and to shape the future for the curriculum for the students that are coming after them. I want to see that not only institutions want to open these routes, but I want to see that students are taking these opportunities. I want to see that students are more active on external level, that they engage with external organizations and they keep in touch with trends, national and European and international. And I really want to see that they become an essential part of our quality culture and that we recognize them. So where is student engagement going right now? We are increasing the fees of higher education, not only in the UK, but in many, many other countries. And I'm afraid that this could bring a more consumerist sort of student body, and how is that going to affect quality? So this is a question that we need to ask ourselves. How is that going to affect their student engagement and the way they input into it? We are looking into a new phase where student engagement is becoming very, very crucial through the new methods that are being developed in higher education, accreditation, and quality assurance. So how do we make sure that our student engagement is growing and is becoming better? We need to show, institutions need to show the results of the student feedback to the students. What they have they improved because of the student feedback they have received, how they have improved it, and how they can continue to improve it through that. The more the students see that this is happening, the more active they will become in this quality culture. Students need to be able to see also what their institutions are doing. So institutions need to become more open and transparent about their policies and about their growth. Institutions need to continue to facilitate partnership between their student bodies, grassroots level students, as well as active students, and of course, the students' unions. And to finish off, I want to say that students should continue to support students, to train the new and upcoming students, to make sure that they're experienced in not only in their fields, but also in the governance of higher education institutions, as well as quality assurance and practices, and to make sure that they can feedback fully within discussions. Thank you.
Are there any questions from the floor to get us started? Over in the back corner there.
Thank you. My name is Mike Williamson. I'm from Sparks. Continuing on a theme, really, we hear a lot about the term partnership. And obviously lots of people in the room think that their institution is working towards partnership. But when I talk to lots of people, I hear lots of very different definitions of what partnership is. So could the panel perhaps go through what they think partnership is, more importantly, what it isn't, and Gwen, you mentioned academic democracy, maybe how it ties into that.
Rachel, perhaps you want to start given the work that NUS has done recently around the notion of partnership.
Yeah, so we've recently done a big piece of work called the Manifesto for Partnership, and this is deliberately an ideological, values-driven piece of work. It's not a report, it's not a research document, it's ideals. And for me, the end of, well, partnership is about the student body through the student union, recognising the importance of collectivism and the legitimate student sort of voice through the students' union, staff, academic staff and support staff and management working together to create a better institution. That means that students and the students' union and staff and every citizen of an institution is part of determining what the institution looks like, not just the learning and teaching area, but every area, because actually every area of an institution affects every citizen of that institution. And the end process, the end of that partnership culture, or the end of that process, we would see sort of democratic institutions, transparent institutions, but with sort of decision-making across the board, decentralised decision-making across the board. So ways that this is being done, and I'll give you a really good example. Liverpool Hope Students' Union are giving every course rep the money to take their lecturer for a coffee at the beginning of the term to have a conversation. What do you want the course to look like? What are you trying to get out of the course? Why have you designed it in the way that you have? Let's have that conversation. And it gives course representatives the opportunity, again, to understand why lecturers are doing the things that they're doing, but also create possible changes or solutions, as opposed to getting to the end of their course and being told that now you can critique what we've already created for you. And that, I think, is the essence of education. It's freedom, it's the sort of academic critique, and it's democracy. And that should be at the very beginning of the process and not at the end.
Okay. Gwen, is that what you'd find at Bath?
To some extent. I mean, I've got two answers to it. One is to some extent operational. One is very trite, but very true, which is annoying about trite things. Partnership really is in the eye of the beholder. So the answer for one institution is not the same as the answer for another institution. The main group you need to ask, I believe, is the collective student voice in whatever version it comes. There are indicators that you do look at. So one of the things that we tend to look at is one of the additional banks of questions in the National Student Surveys, question B6.3, and yes, very sad, I know the number by heart. It is a question that goes along the lines of my comments on the course have been valued and acted upon. Now, quite shockingly, about 4 years ago, the sector overall had an average percentage of 41%. If 41% of the students feel that their comments on the course have been valued and acted upon, I think we have a bit of a problem. You look at it now, it is rather higher. It's just over 50% now. Still not great, but we're doing something. So there are some indications that in terms of partnership, there is a better listening between staff and students going on. And you need to look at it much, much closer to see what that means. Now, at an institutional level, I could quite convincingly say we do not have any committee left within the university that has anything to do with learning and teaching without student representation on it. And these are, by and large, 2 or 3 elected, and quite often there are individual students with a particular interest as well. It's not entirely true. There's one committee where the student union says, this is so boring, we have no interest. That's fine, but they can be part of it if they wish to. That sounds wonderful, but it might be that those students are there and don't actually have much of a voice. They are there to comply with what the staff community is doing. At that point, you've got a nice structure, but you have no partnership. So you need to look at then what the values are and what actually happens. To me, when I work with other institutions, when I find that there is no enhancement and development project left without students on the project development, the project proposal writing, the project group, the project management, once that starts happening, then I get a sense that this is really partnership ongoing. But that relates to my own values. I'm an educational developer, that's where I come from. I believe that if you involve students and staff together at the design of learning and teaching, you're probably looking at a better quality. So if you have a co-ownership at that point, that's a difficult word, ownership, but you have a partnership at that point, then you probably are looking at some serious partnership because you have the students built in, the student voice, the student views, the student needs built in from the beginning. So it's quite a sophisticated look that you need to have at it. But again, the definition of partnership, and this is why student charters up to a point are quite interesting, it's fantastic research material to look at how different institutions define partnership. If you have an institution which is very much a corporate enterprise, that is very much market-driven, that is very much ahead of the game, their partnership will look completely different because their students have very different expectations than you would in a very collegial kind of institution, where students are very much part of the academic community and it's more consensus-driven. It will look very different. The definition, though, needs to come from within the academic community, and I mean staff and students by that. And making that explicit is important. So you've had the long answer. The trite answer is, it really is in the eye of the beholder. It is the institution and their student body that need to work out when it is partnership. But there are indicators that where I think this university is engaging, or it's making sure it's got the ticks in the boxes. I'm not so interested in that.
We're at 2013. We're at a QAA conference again. What needs to happen next from QAA? What will we be talking about in 2023 at QAA conference? In terms of what the organisation can lead on and help drive the sector in? Camille, perhaps?
Well, I think a lot of what Gwen was talking about, it's how do you build in the pathways to get students engaged in institutions? And I think the NUS has some amazing pathways in for committee representation, but there's a lot of other ways that students can engage within institutions, and the NUS isn't the only way. So it's how do institutions create those opportunities for both staff and students to allow that to happen. For example, at King's, we have recently set up an internships office within the institution, and we're actually encouraging staff, instead of hiring part-time people outside the institution, think of when those jobs could be done by students. Even if it's clerical work or if it's research lab work, where could students do that? We've got amazing students at our institution, how can we use them? And we started encouraging people who submit bids for our college teaching fund for innovations in teaching and learning to put students on the bids, put them in as paid interns so that they can help with the enhancement and development of interesting teaching and learning activities. And it's not that staff wouldn't have thought to do that beforehand, but they didn't necessarily know the procedure to how to go about it. So that's where it's sort of on the institution to put the procedures in place.
Okay. Is there still a collective student voice?
My answer is very, very short. That's not my problem. That's what we have a student union for. They are very able to come to a collective voice.
Okay, into the student union voice.
I think that's why collectivism is so important, because actually if you base all of your student engagement on surveys, then you're going to get the majority voice all the time. And the point is that collectivism ensures that minority voices are coming through all the time. And student unions are getting better and better at evidencing that and supporting that. And institutions, if you want real partnership, go and fund that and support it and allow student unions to be independent in doing that. But that's collectivism. That is the essence of collectivism. That's what's so powerful about it.
Brilliant. Back out to the floor. Any questions out there? Right at the back. Josh, I think it is.
Hi, I'm Josh Smith from Leeds University Union. With the best will in the world, you can have loads of really engaged students, and then there are always inevitably some staff who are quite hard to interact with and sort of be engaged with. So I just wondered if the panel have any tips on how to deal with hard to engage staff rather than hard to engage students.
Can the panel tell us the magic answer to engaging hard to engage staff? I'm sure some academic managers would like to know this answer too.
Well, from an academic management, I'm not an academic, but you know, at least from an institutional management point of view, then try to answer, but it does work. Is lots of coffee and cake. We really do that in quite liberal amounts, because if I know that there's an issue, it's quite often worthwhile looking at what's behind that. I mean, the flip side of student consumerism is staff supplyism, isn't it? You know, this is the way you're going to get it, and that's going to have to fit you. And if you're not up to it, you shouldn't be here in the first place. And that's to some extent what you're referring to, isn't it? You know, just don't want to engage. You've got to choose your battles, obviously. Quite often, if the students can't get there directly, then I or one of my colleagues or an associate dean or whatever can take an academic slant on it or an institutional or a staff slant on it and have a discussion. Sometimes it is helpful to leave it be for a little while and see whether the person comes back, because that happens quite often as well. And I'm a great believer in giving the full picture. You as a student will see things from a certain perspective. Staff will see it from a different perspective. So talk to peers and see what their views are. They may not agree with you, but they can help the debate. Have a look at what the statistics within the department saying, unit evaluation, the NSS results, you know, all sorts of surveys that are around which your institution may or may not use, feedback from periodic program reviews, from annual monitoring or whatever, and look at it that way. The argument, this is still an academic community we're working with, whatever it looks like, the argument goes a long way. So evidence and a good argument, but quite often brought by an academic peer, rather than a student or an institutional manager, gives you the best chance of getting there. And once in a while you give up.
And
You just
briefly,
leave it.
Amelia, and then Rachel.
And to add to that, it's all about the quality culture. If the institution is clear about what they want to achieve and how they want to achieve it, and they have a good quality mechanisms, and they actually communicate why they're important, which is all part of the quality culture, why these mechanisms are important and what they're going to achieve through them, they're going to engage the hard to engage staff and students, because these people would start to understand the benefit they will have through that mechanism.
I think just very quickly that we talk about students being able to design and be creative in the quality processes and in changing education, but actually the same goes for staff. And I think Camille was saying that actually in order to get buy-in from staff, a real partnership, it has to come from staff as well as students. Where I hope our partnership manifesto takes us is democratic institutions, and it forces us to look at governance, and actually more and more power has been taken away from academic staff over the course of the last few years, where decisions are made and who they're made by. It's no longer, Senate, for example, where often academic staff it's taken away from there. And actually, in order to really have meaningful decisions made by staff, we've got to look at who's making decisions about the institution and where they're being made.
Okay.
Hello, Liz Bell, Head of Policy at UCAS. I'm very interested, maybe if you could give us some thoughts on these very important issues you've been discussing in terms of developing sort of democracy in institutions and reaching sort of hard to reach groups. And you started me thinking about the widening participation agenda, because, you know, we're trying to get more and more people engaged with higher education who might not sort of immediately think of it for themselves. And it strikes me that actually it's the students that can communicate that very well. So how can you actually, universities sort of use student engagement to actually reach out to communities beyond the university boundaries?
Very briefly, Rachel.
Yeah. So again, a big project we're doing at the moment is about how student unions can drive access agreements and also drive sort of the access agenda. Student unions do this already through clubs and societies. That work is often not recognised by institutions. It comes, I think for me, it boils down to if universities recognise what students care about, as opposed to thinking that they know what students want, then this will be fixed. And that comes from asking students directly. So going through your students' union to do the outreach activity. And you know, Les Ebden says every time use your students' union and access agreements. If you do it, you will have a better access agreement. And the access agreement will not just look at access, but it will look at retention and it will look at student success. And when we take a life cycle approach and we use students to deliver that, not just to create it, but also to deliver it, it's always going to be more powerful.
And then just a thought from the Twitter sphere to end on. And it's a tweet saying, as a comms person rather than a QA person, it's interesting to note the theme of definitions, jargon and language throughout today. And this relates back to an interesting part of a debate earlier in the day when we talked about the accessibility of quality. And actually, are students or any other stakeholders going to be able to engage when we continue to use such complicated and complex language? I'll leave you on that thought and say thank you very much to our panellists today.
I want to say 4 things before you go. First of all, thanks to all those who have spoken on this platform and downstairs. Thank you to you for being such an appreciative and attentive audience. We have learnt a great deal from your contributions. Thank you. Third, there are drinks downstairs. And 4, have a very safe journey home and mind the snow. Thank you.